So walk us through this day. As I understand it, you're in a work meeting, online or otherwise, and all of a sudden it starts with a text message. Is that right?
Um, I believe the how it started was I started my day. It was probably 8:30 in the morning, and I had just gotten on a big upgrade meeting where there was a whole team of my work tech folks on the call, and so it was going to be a several-hour meeting, and I just gotten onto it, having a cup of morning coffee, and I got a phone call that came through on my cell phone, and it was an 800 number. Like, so I don't have, I don't memorize 800 numbers, but a lot of times when these calls come through, I will, if I'm sitting at the computer, I'm quick enough that I can Google an 800 number and see what it is. So in this particular case, I had time to get it into a browser and I searched and it said it was Wells Fargo. So I'm like, okay, well, it's coming from a legit number. So I'll go ahead and answer it. A lot of times I ignore it if I don't recognize the number, but this one I knew it was Wells Fargo. So
So you had actually
um,
taken the step to go to Google, plugged in the number, searched on it. Like I do that all the time, and it came back as legit. So you did that
yeah,
due diligence that you normally would. Okay.
yeah, the number was coming from Wells Fargo's main 800 number for customer service. Um, so I answered the phone, and another thing that I'm always looking for, because I have received a lot of phone scammer calls before, but it usually always there always tends to be a bit of an accent from abroad when a lot of these callers or scammers call, whether it be from in India or Haiti or wherever. You can always usually tell. But this particular gentleman, when I answered the phone, he sounded like he was hanging out here in the United States. He had no accent, very friendly, not overly aggressive. Just kind of mentioned, hey, say, hey, I'm so and so from the Wells Fargo fraud department, and we detected a transaction that we wanted to call you about and make sure that you actually made this purchase because it was in a different geographical location from where you are. So I believe it was out in Maryland. It was a purchase at a Walmart, and for I don't remember what the amount was, but he said, "Do you authorize this purchase? Was this you?" And I said, "Absolutely not. It was not me." Let me also preface that I've gotten these kind of calls from Wells Fargo before, many of them over the years, and they were always legitimately coming from the fraud department. So I had no reason to really think otherwise. Especially the gentleman sounded like he was in the United States. Um, so there was a level of trust, I guess, that I put forward, probably not correctly in that situation. But anyways, I said absolutely not. I did not make any purchases outside of where I live. So that's fraud. You're going to need to, can you handle that? Um, and from there, we started the process of a very long phone call, which in many ways, just about every way, seemed very legitimate.
Interesting. So I think the interesting part to me there is you've received these calls before. This sounded like any number of times in the past you've received a similar call about a potentially fraudulent charge on the account. So again, nothing that screams something you should be suspicious of at this point.
Yeah, and like you had mentioned earlier on, I was on a work call, so my focus was distracted. I was trying to pay attention to two different things at once. In hindsight, probably don't answer the phone when I shouldn't have answered the phone when I was immersed in a work meeting, but you live and learn on those kind of things.
And was this kind of early in the morning then? Was this first thing in the day?
This was yeah, right around 8:30 in the morning. I was already on a Microsoft Teams call for work. So
Got
that's
it.
when the call came in. So I was still groggy. I was still getting my morning coffee,
Sure.
and that's when I answered.
So you've got this call. Again, no red flags at this point. seems like a normal conversation you would have with the Wells Fargo fraud department. And then how does it progress from there?
Well, from there, he said, well, somebody made a transaction here. What we probably need to do is get we need to get your we need to verify that this is you that we're speaking to. So I've had countless calls from Wells Fargo before where they said, hey, we need to send you a code and then you read the code back to us to verify that it's you. So the code came through. Like I said, I was still distracted with my work meeting, and the code came through, and I read it back to him, and he said, okay, thanks, we'll go ahead and proceed. What we probably need to do first, if I remember the call right, was he said, we'd like for you to change your PIN number for your card. Now, I may have this out of sequence a little bit, but I think one of the first things was we'd like you to change your PIN number. So what we're going to do is transfer you to another number. You're going to type in your existing PIN, and then you're going to pick a new PIN, and then it will transfer you back to me. So that's exactly what happened. And I've actually had many occasions with my bank where the bank transferred me off to this automated computer voice operated message, and then once I change the PIN, it transfers me back to them. And that's what happened. I ended up back with that customer service representative.
So when they transferred you, it was to something that sounded like an automated system. It wasn't as if you got handed to a different person at that point.
Yeah, this was definitely a like an interactive voice response system. So whoever was doing this had some sort of telephone system, whether it
Sure.
be on their computer or like a PBX, but it was believable because I typed in digits on the phone and it registered those digits. So it pulled down those dial tone digits.
So you change your PIN with the automated system, you get sent back to the person that you were on the phone with previously.
Yeah. So about this time, I start getting a couple email alerts from Wells Fargo. While just keep reminding you, I'm still on that work call, so I'm not paying the closest attention. So I look at the email, and I believe the first one just said something about a password change. Well, I chalked that up to me changing my PIN, but actually what they had done is they had taken that number verification that I had gotten in my text, and they had changed the password. I didn't look close enough at these text messages on the phone, but because they were all in sequence. They're the past ones that I had gotten from other customer service representatives from Wells Fargo were in this same text string. So there were previous ones from months prior where I had verified my identity by giving them that code. So this one looked very similar to all of those other ones, with the only caveat being is that I wasn't paying close attention to this text because it was among all the others, but it actually in the text it said, this is to confirm you're changing your password. So that was the first oversight on my part that I kind of went along with, but in hindsight, I wasn't looking closely enough at that text message, what that message was.
But how interesting that, I mean, it had to be fairly disarming. Maybe disarming is not the right way to say this, but the fact that that text fell right in line with these other texts that you've legitimately received from Wells Fargo in the past. So again, something that to kind of disarm you from thinking anything is out of the ordinary here.
Yeah, very, very run of the mill, especially when it showed up on that same text screen.
Hmm.
So, so from there, I believe the sequence of what I started to see was I got another email. The person I was speaking to was very kind and cordial. There were a couple of times where he asked if he could put me on hold, and I was already busy, so that was fine if you want to put me on hold because I'm already distracted doing something else with work. But so I let him put me on hold a couple times. Each time, it might have been 2-3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes total at one point. So he would come back and check in on me and make sure I was doing okay. And while he had me on hold one of these first times, I saw an email come through and it said something about an online transfer from my credit card over to my checking account, because I have a checking account and a credit card all on my same online profile for them. It said that there was a transfer of $2,400 from the credit card to the checking account. So he came back to me at one point and I said, hey, if you've reset my stuff and got things locked out so hackers can't get in, well, I'm still getting these emails that says they're still trying to do things. And his explanation was all very good. He said, well, you may be getting some delayed responses in your email for this. You can ignore those. It's probably, the auto system that's detecting and sending out these emails might be a little bit behind. So don't worry about it. We've got that under control. So that's what, every step of the way I was disarmed. Like you said, there was no reason to be suspicious yet at this point.
Even to the extent that I think you said they had bad jazz music as hold music, right? I mean, again, not just dead air. You were hearing what you would hear calling
Yeah,
any bank, I guess.
it sounded like every run-of-the-mill horrible hold music that you listen to when you call into any credit card or any bank. It
Yeah.
wasn't just dead air. It wasn't, it wasn't just noise or somebody talking in the background. It was this crappy jazz music. So nothing against jazz. Jazz is a great
Right.
genre, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
hold music was bad.
So at this point, how far into the call are you? 15, 20 minutes in?
I'd say by this point, yeah, we were probably 15 or 20 minutes in. Um,
And
so
the back and forth is kind of continuing, but as that is happening, you're getting what in hindsight were legitimate email notifications from Wells Fargo that something else was going on with your accounts. And we can come back to that, but that's ultimately what was happening.
yeah, that's correct. Now,
Okay.
there were a couple instances during this first 15 to 30 minutes where the call actually got disconnected, and I thought maybe it was my connection, but in hindsight, I believe it was their phone connection kept dropping wherever it was located.
Hmm.
And so when they called back, for whatever reason, they needed me to reset that password again a couple times. So I think there were like 3 times total where they sent me that code and they asked me to read it back to them because their explanation was that the phone connection had dropped, so they needed to re-verify.
Hmm.
So again, um, I didn't look closely enough at those texts because I was already kind of in the trust zone with this person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So again, you're maybe 20, 25 minutes in here. What happens next?
Well, so I believe the next step was he said, okay, we've got everything locked down on your checking account and your credit card. What we need to do now is we're going to have you, we need to have you, excuse me here. What he said was next was we need to secure your online banking profile. So we're going to do that next, which was the perfect opportunity to put me back on hold some more. Um, he put me back on hold. That it gradually got more time as time went by. So maybe it was like a 10-minute hold now before he'd come back and check on me. And it was believable because he said the systems are, sorry it's taking so long, but we're trying to get your online banking secured, and that's another department, and I'm trying to work with them. And right now their systems are a little slow. So, thinking back on it, this was a genius way to keep me on the phone and on hold where I'm not digging into my emails to, observe more of what's going on. It was a great distraction along with my other work distraction. So this went on for much longer, this whole process. He kept coming back about every 10 minutes, and this went on going on into the next hour. So into the next hour, I decided, okay, I had my earbuds in. I just decided I'm going to take a lunch break, go out for lunch. All the while I was sitting listening to the hold music. And he'd keep checking back every once in a while. So I was out to lunch, and by this time it was like a crazy amount of time. We were probably approaching an hour and a half on the phone. And I started to think to myself, this is the longest I've ever had to wait on hold with the bank. I mean, I know sometimes they have high volume times where you call in and you're waiting a long time, but this is the most ever. And he would come back and say, sorry, the systems are still slow. We're at 85%, and then your online banking will be secured. So at this point, I started. Now some bells started to ring for me because it just didn't make sense that it should take this long. So around this time, I decided to hang up and call back into the main Wells Fargo telephone number. And now they were a little slow. That calling back into the main customer service line, it took me about 10 minutes to get through to somebody. And around this same time, I got an email that said something to the effect of, your account has been authorized for a Samsung phone. You know how you have a chip in the phone where you can scan things and make purchases? Well, it said you've been enrolled in the Samsung Pay program or whatever it is that would allow you to do your online banking with just your phone at a cashier. I got an email about that while I was on hold. And then I spoke to, eventually got through to some customer service people at the real Wells Fargo. And after a couple minutes, they did some checking and said, no, we didn't have any fraud flags on your account. There were no purchases made in Maryland at a Walmart that we can see. And that's when my heart had kind of just sank, because I knew that I'd been duped at that point. I knew that, everything seemed like it made sense and it was legit, but at this point, it's just kind of like, oh man, they got me.
And to go back to those email communications you were receiving from Wells Fargo over the course of this wasn't necessarily, these weren't some sort of alerts from Wells Fargo that something was going on, potentially fraudulent. It was just notification of a transaction happening. These transactions happen to be part of the scam that was being perpetrated, right? So there was never a point where Wells Fargo was actually reaching out to you because they were detecting something out of the ordinary.
No, what they were sending me was just, okay, this is
Here's
to
what
confirm
happened.
that you've changed your online banking password, or this is to confirm that you've changed, you've enrolled this Samsung phone to be able to use it at a cashier or a merchant.
And you're well into maybe an hour and a half of this back and forth at this point.
Yeah, and like I said, at that point, it started to hit home that something was off here. It was very masterful on their part to keep me on hold that long. I mean, from a criminal mind, that's a great idea, because they were keeping me from doing things to investigate this further.
Absolutely. So it doesn't feel like they really needed anything else to do what they were going to do. To your point, keeping you on hold was to keep you from figuring out what was going on and making some
Yes.
additional phone calls. Okay. So now the alarm is going off. You disconnect with the actual Wells Fargo. Where does that lead you?
Well, I do just want to circle back to say that if you'll remember when the scammers had me transfer me to that number to change my PIN.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what they were doing there was they were collecting my real PIN number. So I wasn't
Sure.
actually changing my PIN number. It was collecting the digits of my PIN number so that they'd be able to use that later. So from here, um, Wells Fargo was the rep was not the most responsive. They said, we don't see anything wrong, but we may need to lock your account out. So I believe they put a freeze on my account at that point. But at that point, there'd already been a $2,400 purchase transferred from my credit card to my checking account. And by that point, these scammers they had my PIN number for my ATM, and they had a telephone that was basically as good as an ATM card that they can hold up to an ATM with the chip and log in to an ATM and remove cash.
Americans over 60 years old lose over $100,000 per identity theft incident. PCmatic comes with a $1 million identity theft insurance. Get protection for your whole family. Go to PCmatic.com, built by Americans to protect America.
So that's what actually happened next is, I believe while I was right before I was talking to the real Wells Fargo, or around that time, they'd already made a transaction at an ATM in Houston, Texas.
Hmm.
So there had to be an element to this group that was local to the United States to be able to go up and walk up to an ATM and remove the cash. So I looked at my transactions in the email, or I don't remember where I looked, but there was a transaction for a couple $1,000 came out, if I remember right, from an ATM, and then another transaction for like another $1,000 or somewhere in that neighborhood came from a U.S. Postal Service, where I believe you can do like money transfers and MoneyGram type things. So,
Sure.
um,
So before you actually hung up with the actual Wells Fargo, did they put some sort of freeze in place? So by the time you were done with them, at least you knew things were kind of locked down at that point?
they did put a freeze in place by that point.
Okay.
So the money was already withdrawn and transferred out though.
Right.
So I spoke to them a little bit longer, and I think I asked to be transferred to another representative in their fraud department. And at that moment, they made it sound like, the representative I spoke with made it sound like that they're not liable for these kind of things if you willingly give a code or a password to a scammer.
Hmm.
So that I was pretty perturbed at that point, because I was looking at the possibility that I was not going to get my money back for this. And they were kind of reaffirming the fact that, yeah, I mean, you gave them the password, you gave them your information. So, I mean, even though the phone number that's coming into my cell phone shows up as a Wells Fargo toll-free
Right.
number,
Right.
so that, they could send that, they can mask their number as whatever they want. So,
Did
I
they seem
believe
to acknowledge that this was, I don't want to say common, but were they aware that something like this was happening or that their numbers were being spoofed? But I mean, was that part of your conversation with the actual Wells Fargo?
they didn't seem to have much awareness of it. Or if
Hmm.
they did, they weren't mentioning that they knew about these kind of cases. Um, but I was explaining to the rep at Wells Fargo that I mean, this is very sophisticated. Like,
Yeah,
the fact that I'm giving them a code like I do to you whenever you're asking for my identity. I mean, everything made sense. And in hindsight, like I said, it makes me think that whoever, perpetrated this whole thing knew all the protocols and all the processes at a bank, what you do.
absolutely.
Maybe they worked at a bank before, I'm not sure, but I mean, everything lined up with my memory of how business is operated in a situation like that from a bank.
So are you still on the line with the we're going to call them the scammers while you're talking to the actual Wells Fargo, or is
No,
there?
at that point I had decided after, like I said, around an hour and a half on the phone on hold, I had decided that, something was awry here, and I had already hung up, and then I called back into Wells Fargo, the main number,
Got it.
which,
Got it. So you walk away from the actual Wells Fargo, at least with things frozen. Is that kind of the end of the timeline, and now it's a matter of unpacking what actually happened, or was there anything else to it once you talked to
yeah,
the actual bank?
I believe that was most of what happened with the timeline. The the next step was really just knowing that I had to wait. Wells Fargo's last words to me were, okay, we're going to file a dispute for this. We're going to put in a claim. We need to investigate it. Our fraud department needs to investigate it. But it's going to take something like 5 to 7 business days. So basically, I'm without the money that was in my account,
You've
and
got
I
no
have no,
access to those funds
got
over this.
no access to those
Right.
funds. Um, That didn't stop me from calling in every day, even though they said 5 to 7 business days. But it's kind of a helpless feeling when your money is in limbo and you don't know if you're going to get it back,
Absolutely.
from the bank that you thought was the bank, but it was actually a fraud uh, organization.
So do you end up hearing back from them during this 5-7 day window of investigation at all?
It was pretty minimal. Basically, it would just be an email every day or every other day that said, we are still investigating your claim. Please, continue to let the process play out for the next few business days. And that's basically all I got. So
So no requests
for,
for screenshots or the phone number that was being used or any of that?
no, nobody called me back personally to talk to me about the problem.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, how busy Wells Fargo was at that point. I don't know if I would have hoped or wished that I would have gotten some calls to express a little urgency or concern about this. But basically, all I got was just an email or two or three over the next few days as I waited to find out if my money was going to be freed up or not.
So let's fast forward a bit. Do you get some sort of resolution out of Wells Fargo at this point?
I believe it was about 4 or 5 days at that mark. I got a message that they would be redepositing the funds into my account. Now, I went on social media and I tagged the bank. I mean, I wasn't trying to put out any false information, but I wanted my money back, so I went out and told my story online, and mainly because I wanted other people to know that this is a thing, and I'm a tech savvy guy, and I got fooled by this. I can only imagine, some kind old grandparents. I mean, they would have fell for it quicker than I did, which doesn't seem possible because I fell pretty quick. But um, mainly, I got the resolution. I don't know if anything that I put online helped speed that along, but at some point, I did get an email that the funds were going to be deposited back into my account. But it also said that the investigation was still ongoing. So even after I saw the deposit go back in, I was still leery and worried that they were going to do more on the investigation and to decide, oh no, you're liable, we'll take it back out. So really, it was just the whole process was nerve wracking. But it was good to have the funds deposited back in. But like I said, it wasn't a quick resolution by any means.
Speaking of, it's got to be disheartening that you haven't had much communication with them in terms of, again, asking for more information about what actually happened. You wonder what the extent of the investigation is, behind the scenes, but without at least some knowledge of how it all unfolded seems a little strange.
Yeah. I feel like more communication with your customers is better in a situation like that. But in this one, it's kind of like I was just kind of left out in no man's land until this investigation wrapped up.
Yeah. So anything more to add about the experience? I mean, we can kind of get into, are you changing the way you approach these phone calls, text messages? Are you even more obviously skeptical of any of these communications? I'm just curious if you changed any of your habits as a result.
Well, I think the number one thing is that I used to believe that phone calls that would come to my personal number could potentially be from the actual bank. But it's a different time now. There's too much technology that they can use to fool people with. There's too many variables. They've gotten more advanced with the way they do things. So I will never answer a telephone call and believe that it's really a bank fraud department ever again. I'm always going to hang up and call back in directly to the main number because it's too tricky to navigate. Yeah, that's the main thing. I just don't believe any text or any phone call I get. I call back in and verify that it's really happening.
I think it's a great point. It's actually something I've shared with family members is if you get a call like this, don't necessarily call that same number back. Go find a valid number. It's on the back of your debit card or on a bank statement or something like that, because there's just too many ways to spoof calls and redirect calls, and not to mention the impact that AI is having on everything else too. But that's, yeah,
Yeah,
that skepticism is very, very healthy, I think.
and just to give a little bit more information about my IT field. I program telephone systems for a living, so I know that I could spoof numbers, and I knew all this going into this phone call, but I had my guard down, and they got me.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's, at least as far as I know, is way too easy to do in terms of spoofing numbers. That's probably the least challenging thing to
Yeah,
do
there's
in some
nothing,
cases.
because a lot of these calls originate from outside the United States. There's no regulating body that can keep a number from being spoofed. So you'll see calls that could come to you from a different person. You call that person back, and then they'll say, "I didn't call you," because they didn't call you. Their number was spoofed by the scammer to use to pretend like there's somebody else when they call you.
It does kind of make you wonder, there's a lot of talk about cybersecurity awareness training, whether through your employer or things that people do on their own. If there was some element of training that could have helped you in this situation. And again, knowing that you're a tech savvy person, you work in technology, you deal firsthand in IT. Do you feel like there's something that maybe you learned that would have been helpful to know before, or is it just simply a matter of they caught you at the right time, at the right place, and I don't know. What are your feelings about that?
I think I definitely didn't expect to hear somebody that sounds like they're stateside talking to me, who can communicate clearly. I can understand. I didn't expect to get a phone call like that. I've always, you know, like I said, it's a little bit of a bruise to the ego for a tech savvy person to get fooled by something like this. But I think education for anybody, no matter whether they're really good with technology or they're not, is helpful, because somebody like me had a false sense of security that I know all the possibilities that can come my way, when obviously I didn't, because I ended up getting scammed. So any kind of training or further education is a great reminder.
I am curious on the person you were communicating with. I mean, is there any indication that that was somehow a manipulated voice or some sort of artificial voice? You talk about it sounding U.S. based and not foreign by any means, but any indication that it was somehow being manipulated, or was this actually the person talking, you think?
I have heard about AI being used to talk back and forth and be convincing. This particular situation, I believe it was a real human being, because he was able to answer my calls or my questions.
Sure.
When I actually mentioned at one point to him, because I work in call centers, I said, "Hey, your headset sounds a little muffled. You might want to talk to your supervisor and get a new headset, because I work with these kind of issues every day and your audio is bad." And he said, "Oh, whoa, thank you. I didn't, nobody's told me that yet."
Hmm.
So, I mean, it was just so believable, just, based on the interaction. Now, but I
Right.
do believe the AI thing is going to be more of a thing where they're manufacturing voices to talk and sound like other people or other entities.
Yeah, it's just going to perfect this type of scam, unfortunately. As a result of sharing your story online, have you heard from others that have experienced anything similar, or had conversations with people in similar
Yes.
situations?
Matter of fact, after this scam happened to me, I have a friend who I was speaking with a couple days later. I think she just texted to say hi. And I said, "Oh, how have you been?" And she's like, "Oh, I've been better. I just got scammed for like $3,000 from scammers pretending to be Wells Fargo." And I'm like, "Oh no, are you kidding me? This happened to you too?" Same exact scam. She was fooled by the same processes that they used on me, and I didn't feel quite as bad at that point for falling for it, because other people who I know are smart. This person was a very intelligent person. Fell for the same thing. Had to go through all the cancellation of all their banking stuff. She ended up ultimately switching to another bank because of this, taking all her money out. But it was the same bank as mine and everything, that they were pretending to scam. So when I
Hmm.
when I heard from her that this had occurred, I knew that this is a large scale operation. Because I mean, what are the chances you talk to somebody who who just fell for the same scam that you did a couple days after you did. It had to be a big operation.
Do you get any sense that they knew you were a Wells Fargo customer going in, or do you feel like this was a kind of spray and pray type of attack, just hoping that they would stumble on someone who was actually a Wells Fargo customer?
I want to say I feel like maybe this is more prominent with the bigger banks, and maybe there's some database or some spam, because your information is collected in so many places now that there's no way to know where my email was sitting. Maybe they go to the Wells Fargo online banking, and maybe they put my email in, and then, maybe this is a legitimate customer. I mean, maybe they do that with thousands of emails throughout the day that they just find online. I'm not sure. I tend to think that a smaller bank maybe wouldn't be quite as susceptible to this because the scammers maybe aren't trying it on smaller bank websites, but I could be wrong. That's just speculation on my part.
Yeah, and unfortunately, given the volume of data breaches day in and day out, who knows where everyone's information is laying these days and what exactly is exposed, not to mention your banking information, or at least who you bank with. So
yeah, it's just frightening. We give permission to basically every app on our phone, every website we go to. I mean, basically they don't even try to hide it anymore that they're collecting your information. No matter what website, even if it's a legit app, I mean, they say, would you like to turn off tracking or not? I mean, on my iPhone, I just figure my data is everywhere on the net.
Yeah, to that point, interestingly enough, for the past about every 10 years, we've done this little experiment where we actually include an Easter egg inside of our terms and conditions in our EULA for our PCmatic software, where we'll insert a little blurb that says, if you're actually reading through this level of detail and you contact us, I think we've offered $500, $1,000, whatever, to the first person who notifies us. And in many cases, it'll take months before we'll find anyone. I mean, and this is several thousand transactions later before someone has actually read the EULA close enough to actually find the Easter egg. So to your point, on a daily basis, we're installing apps and accepting terms and conditions and data sharing that only makes the problem worse. So
yeah, I'm guilty of that too. I just scroll to the bottom of the end user license agreement and click agree because who has time to read a 15-page legalese disclosure about something? You just, if you want to use that software or that service, you have to agree to it,
Yeah, exactly right. You probably consider yourself to be a fairly tech savvy person who realizes there's all sorts of scams and cyber related frauds and text related frauds out there. So take us through that. I mean, where do you see yourself there? Do you consider yourself tech savvy? Do you consider yourself pretty mindful of these things to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit of a bruise to the ego because I've been in tech for so many years, probably over 25 or more. I started out in tech support very early on, right out of tech school. So it's definitely something that I'm very savvy about, and I'm always leery of email scams and text scams and anything that I've kind of seen the whole gamut of these type of things. And for something like any kind of banking issue to occur, for me was kind of blindsiding because I'm always leery and always watching for these kind of things due to my career in IT with viruses and phishing scams and all kinds of stuff like that. So I think the most surprising thing about it is just you always expect something that it's going to happen to people that don't know how to run a computer or don't pay attention to smartphone technology. But I feel like I'm a pretty advanced user on most systems and gadgets. So the thing that I've kind of relayed to other people is that if it can happen to me, it's definitely can happen to anybody.
Is your antivirus outdated? Save 41% with PCmatic. Get antivirus protection, VPN, identity theft protection, and more. Built by Americans to protect America. Go to PCmatic.com.